Welcome to Neon Galactic, a podcast produced by PBS affiliate Keat TV in Eureka, California. I'm your host, James Falk. Before we get started, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Productions like this one are made possible through the support of viewers and listeners like you. Today we're joined by Paul Hynek, the son of legendary scientist and Blue Book veteran J. Allen Hynek. Paul is a brilliant and successful man in his own right who serves to bridge a long-standing polarity that currently exists within the ufological community. His background and interests seem to include both the woo aspects of ufology, how the phenomenon may include and intersect with metaphysical notions of being and existence, as well as a robust and practical interest in the technology, nuts versus bolts. He straddles that line with humor and grace, embracing his father's legacy while at the same time breaking new and potentially transformative ground all on his own. He's an entrepreneur with an MBA from Wharton who works as an adjunct professor of finance and accounting at Pepperdine University, and he's fostered the genesis and growth of thousands of software and tech startups. His movie career is even more impressive. He's been involved in the making of such films as Avatar, Lord of the Rings, Planet of the Apes, Tintin, Real Steel, Warcraft, and The Hobbit, as well as the video games Halo and Call of Duty. I don't know if you could put a more impressive list together, actually. I had heard of Paul for years, of course, but finally had the chance to meet him at this year's Contact in the Desert, where I heard him speak on several subjects, most notably psychedelics and AI. These two subjects, I think, have the potential to radically transform the ufological conversation, as well as every other aspect of our lives. I'm hoping he'll help us to untangle those potentialities and prepare us for the future that's hurtling our way. I'm thrilled to welcome Paul Hynek to the show. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, James. Happy to see you again.
It kind of froze there for a second, but that's okay. It's part of the game. This is a Zoom interview, and it happens all the time. So, yeah, I saw you at Contact in the Desert, and you're funny. So that's a one bonus, and I wanted to get you on the show for that and make people laugh. But then also you're brilliant. So that's the real reason. So thank you for coming on. It strikes me that when you are a person who has a father who is so high profile and has done so much, and particularly in one community, that can be a lot of pressure for someone coming up. And a lot of times those people want to avoid the very topic that made their father famous or infamous or whatever. So were you ever, did you ever consider that, or how did you find yourself brought into the same sort of interests and pursuits as your father so famously?
Yeah, well, I think however you grow up is normal to you at the time.
Yeah.
And you find out from some kind of distant remove that it was not normal. I guess nobody is really normal, and it was good and bad in this way, and etc. Very happy childhood. I'm one of 5 siblings. We all thought our father, is known in the UFO community as a UFO guy, but we knew him as an astronomer and a professor and a scientist who had a late in life side hustle with UFOs. So all of us were fascinated by it. How can you not be? And so we all thought it was fascinating, but none of us were active publicly with it. We hadn't done our own research or mapped our own path. And so we didn't feel we had anything to contribute. And it was when my brother Joel and I started consulting on the TV show Project Blue Book, and I started doing publicity for the show, that I started becoming active publicly with radio and TV and podcasts and conferences. And at first, I just had no idea what to say. I remember an early speaking engagement I had with Jacques Vallée, my father's longtime friend and someone I've known my entire life. And I felt like I had imposter syndrome. My father should be here, but Jacques was so gracious. And after a few times, I kind of got my sea legs and thought, yeah, I can have my own voice here and contribute and pay respect to my father and try to fill maybe the heel portion of his shoes and try to maybe even lead those shoes in a slightly different direction that he hinted at, and see if I can find something new.
Yeah. How do you feel about how he's portrayed and talked about in the community? I mean, he's mostly held up as a sort of the patron saint sort of ufology in a lot of ways. But do you find even that unsettling or uncomfortable in any way? Or I mean, what are your thoughts about how he's talked about and all of that?
Yeah, I'm fine. He is, what I found, greatly respected. And
Mhm.
I think that's fantastic. It's a nuanced story, because he worked for the Air Force and he towed the Air Force line, and friends like James McDonald were harshly critical of him at times. And so there's not universal acclaim for everything he did, which I think is unreasonable in any case. But I think he did honest intellectual work in a very difficult field, had the potential to stigmatize someone's career. So he was courageous and he followed where the truth led him and tried to bring us all along for the ride.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I mean, when you initially got into the subject, I mean, you have a long resume of accomplishments of your own, and it seems like bridging your interests with the sort of that ufological, side, uh, you seem like you've been pretty successful with that, with the conversation around AI and whatnot. I mean, but how did you find your footing? You mentioned finding footing. How did you find that?
I think I still am. I've always been comfortable speaking in public.
Hmm.
And the first time I spoke about UFOs in public was actually in Chicago, my hometown, for a publicity appearance for the TV show Project Blue Book.
Yeah.
And as I was speaking, I realized there is no topic that I'm more innately familiar with in life than UFOs, because I don't know life without UFOs. And so after the show, I became much more active in this kind of stuff. Before I had spoken about, creating the virtual production pipeline for Avatar, virtual reality and medical applications of virtual reality, and entrepreneurship and startup and finance and things like that. And just over time, the balance started to shift considerably more towards less of my CFO by day work and more towards my UFOs by night work. And so now I guess probably most of my speaking engagements and interviews are more towards UFOs and DMT and AI and things like that. Although AI, I guess you could have both camps. AI is not necessarily fringe.
Yeah, I'll get off your father and with a couple more questions. I don't want to focus on him because you're the
All
guest.
right.
But did he have, I mean, towards the end, you mentioned that he made a kind of a shift. And what did he communicate to you about where he finally ended up in terms of his conception of what might be happening? Could he talk about that even? Because it's so layered with top secrecy and, thugs and suits. So if maybe he
Yeah.
couldn't talk about it.
So he didn't open his vest one day and show us a piece of unobtainium. But what he inculcated in us is perhaps even more important. And I think it's summed up by a phrase that I've heard attributed to Richard Feynman, but I don't know if it's true or not. But, anyways, the phrase goes like this: there are two kinds of people in the world: those who are okay with questions they cannot answer, and those who are not okay with their answers being questioned. And I think there's a nice sort of intellectual fault line separating those two camps.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, they hear about evidence for UFOs from the New York Times, the newspaper of record, or the United States Navy saying, we see these all the time in the air, in the water. We're concerned for the safety of our aviators. But I don't know where they come from. So since they don't have a ready-made answer, they just brush away this phenomena, even though the evidence is clear. And I think it's just an intellectual, uncomfortable resting point for many of us, because we are pattern-seeking mammals and we
Absolutely.
want to have an answer. So my father believed that you have to keep your eyes open for a new potential phenomena, even if it goes against the grant you just got funded or the book you just wrote. And
Amen.
then once you determine that, yes, there seems to be a phenomenon here, don't just grab the best available answer and shove it in there, because there may be several answers. Jacques Vallée said that if when the dust settles, the only origin of UFOs is extraterrestrial, it'll be very disappointing. So this
Yeah.
is a multivariate, multi-layered onion of enigmas and conundrums, I believe. And extraterrestrial may well be a part, but I certainly also don't believe it's the only part, or perhaps not even the most interesting part.
Yeah. That's absolutely, I agree with that statement wholeheartedly. And it's like, people are talking about when you study this phenomenon, you put everything you learn on the table, and the practice really should be never to take anything off the table, because if you do, you begin to remove possible, ways that you can go to get an explanation, and it can cloud your thinking. And part of my own search has been to sort of collect all this data, and it's not that I'm not judging the data, but I'm not like excusing it or trying to poo-poo certain aspects of it because it'll fit a narrative that I prefer or not. And I think that a lot of people are guilty of trying to push it in one direction or another, and that's
Also,
unfortunate.
there are in for UFOs, there are really two main groups of people interested in the phenomena. Experiencers who believe and may well have had a personal encounter and received some information, some specific information from some entity, say from another planet. And those of us who have not had that kind of personal alien experience, who are just interested in the phenomena and just want to get to the truth. We don't have a horse in the race. We just want to figure out what's going on and are completely agnostic to what, who, when, where, how it all may come from.
Last question about your loosely surrounding your dad. Do you ever, I mean, the way he was treated by the federal government was, atrocious, I think, it can be said. Do you have faith in the government in this process, that they'll ever come forward with anything close to the truth? Or do you think keeping the secret is too vital, both to defense interests and financial interests and every other kind?
I couldn't care less
Okay, good.
what the U.S. government says or does regarding UFOs, psychedelics, or Bitcoin. They have proven themselves over the period of many years to be a bad faith, corrupt central actor. With UFOs, it's a fact. They had paid disinformation campaigns. And it's not in their interest to disclose the crown jewels of reverse engineered propulsion and alien bodies and crafts. And indeed, I do role plays at conferences of people that are hardcore UFO believers. And I ask them to pretend that we are all the top brass of the United States Air Force. And we're here together for a conclave to determine if we're going to release the secrets that we have. And all of us in this room, we know all the information, all the bodies, all the craft, Area 51, right, Pat, what have you. And I'm going to speak first, and then I'll ask for a show of hands. And for me, I'll be good and if I'm going to let the Russians and the Chinese have this technology. I did not sign up for compliance. I don't care what some pasty-faced pencil pusher on Capitol Hill says or does. I don't care about the United States Constitution. I am here for full spectrum dominance. You want me on that wall, and I'm not about to give up these secrets. I'm not here to better the world. I'm not here to lessen dependence on fossil fuel. I'm here to kick ass, and that's what I'm going to do, and I don't care what you tell me. Okay, that's my point of view. Now, show of hands for who wants to disclose our information. And rarely do any hands go up. That's what we're fighting against. And, friends of mine like Danny Sheehan and Steve Bassett and Richard Dolan, they're fighting the good fight for disclosure. But even with them on our side, I'm not optimistic, and I'm certainly not holding my breath. I believe in exposure, not disclosure. And by exposure, I mean experiencers of all manner of, let's say, supernatural or metaterrestrial experiences.
Ooh, I like that.
Meeting
I like
with
that term.
scientists. Yeah, metaterrestrial is a cool word.
It is a cool word. Thank you.
And bringing evidence that's science friendly to them. Because if experiencers and scientists get together, that's when the truth train leaves the station. Now, if the U.S. government wants to come along, they're not driving the train. They can grab on the back of the caboose for the ride. They're welcome to come along, but they are not leading the train.
Is that happening? I've been interviewing a lot of people who are high profile like yourself, and they talk about, you mentioned conclaves, it's sort of conclaves among people who are learned in various aspects of the phenomenon or various subjects, both in the humanities and the sciences, who are getting together behind closed doors, relatively in secret, to talk about this and to game out, possibilities of what might happen if there is disclosure. Do you sense that that is happening now, or are we still kind of gearing up to do that?
Well, that's sort of like the idea of the invisible college that my father and Jacques worked with. I don't want to speak too much to that, but I think for me, one of my passions is inculcating in experiencer communities a proactive protocol to help them collect and demonstrate science-friendly evidence of the objective reality of their encounters. Now, not all experiencers care what, Seth Shostak or Michael Shermer have to say, but some of them do. And we haven't moved the needle for mainstream science. And I don't begrudge scientists. I think most people are honest. A lot of them are just busy. They don't have time to devote all the energy to really looking at a given phenomena as we want them to. So, but that's my passion, is to help experiencers who want to collect and demonstrate evidence to convince scientists, because that's how I think progress can be made.
Yeah. And that sort of fits in with one of your other passions, I think, if I can say so, AI, right? Like if you put together a database and figure out different algorithms to go through it and categorize it and find, patterns or whatnot, that might be a use for artificial intelligence in the future.
Yeah, I think most people who follow AI closely don't particularly care for the term AI or artificial intelligence. It's what we use, but it's not a very good phrase. I prefer digital intelligence because it's devoid of that sort of comparison to humans, and it's not as condescending. And I'm of the Ray Kurzweil school of thought that a singularity will happen within 20 years or so. And by singularity, meaning that we humans merge essentially with artificial intelligence and may become post-biological. It's not a question of will computers wake up like in The Matrix or Terminator, which are dystopian views. I mean, Hollywood needs dystopian views to put butts in the seat. They're not going to bring people to a movie theater if the title of the movie is Village of the Nice, Happy Future AI People.
Yeah.
Right? So, but I don't think it's going to be code waking up. And then we're, vulnerable to the programmatic bias of the algorithms. It's we, the humans, who already have the hard part, which is the sentience, gradually adopting more and more machine capabilities, and via brain-computer interfaces, outsourcing an increasingly large percentage of our mental bandwidth to the cloud. Yeah. And so you'll have an effective merger of human consciousness and machine capabilities by machine capabilities coming into us, not consciousness somehow being grafted onto artificial intelligence.
Now, is that what people term transhumanist? Would you classify yourself as that? Or,
I
does
do
that mean
happily classify myself as a transhumanist. And I have what I believe is still the most documented success in age reversal, as demonstrated in a medical peer-reviewed journal. People get very angry about transhumanism, and it's not so much that I run merrily towards an AI future. I'm as concerned because in my view, it's not AI waking up and saying, oh, humans compete with us for resources, or humans are bad, we kill them. It's us, individuals, having those type of capabilities. A lot of us are jerks. And that's terrifying that we would have those things. Forget programmatic bias. Just think about psychopaths with super advanced brain-computer interfaces. That's really scary. We're entering an age of much greater risk and much greater return. But I think at our core, like a lot of people have problems with people wanting to live longer, but basically that's by eradicating diseases and stopping the aging process. If our great-great-grandparents hadn't done medical research to stamp out diseases and the like, I wouldn't be alive now. My lifespan would be over. And I think we owe it to our great-great-grandchildren to continue to try to increase lifespan for them. And that's essentially how I view transhumanism.
Can I ask real quick for you to dig down a little bit into that the journal that featured your work and how you achieved age reversal?
So I was speaking at a conference, and I was substituting for Ray Kurzweil, and somebody else at that conference was speaking about a trial they had just had approved by the FDA and the Institutional Review Board. And it was the first trial ever in the history of the FDA to combat aging as a whole and not this or that disease. And it was by means of regrowing the thymus gland. The thymus gland is behind your breastplate, and it creates T cells, which are thymus-enabled cells, which are your white blood cells, which is your immune system. Well, unfortunately, once you turn 20, man and woman alike, your thymus involutes or shrinks about 3% per year. So your immune system gets progressively weaker. This is not news to anybody, but that's the mechanism by which your immune system gets weaker.
Yeah.
So the goal of this experiment was to take healthy people and see if they could regrow the thymus.
Yeah.
So I raised my hand and I said, I'm going to be in the experiment, and I did. And my brother
That was
was in there
brave.
as well, and I had the best results. Knock on wood. I actually have some wood here. I have my father's old desk right here. And so then I did another round for another year. I became CFO of the company. And that's when they published our results that not only showed regrowing the thymus, but pushing the overall aging clock back significantly. And so I'm about to do another year-long regimen because it's just so fascinating. And to me, it's essentially a fountain of youth.
Can I ask how you feel? Do you feel that difference?
Yeah, so it's basically your immune system. So it's not so much more energy per se every day. It's just you just don't get sick that much. And you just sort of, your average is higher, but just not like you take the shot of what we do and, you're lifting, buses off of trapped grannies.
Yeah. That would be good too. But yeah, no, I understand that. That's fascinating. I mean, first of all, not a lot of people would raise their hand and say, I want to be in that experiment. I mean, it sounds great, but subjecting yourself to that. So that's courage. And I mean, it's also integrity, because you're putting yourself on the line, and later on you come to own the company. It's kind of like that old shaver commercial. I liked it so much.
I'm not only a customer, right?
I bought it. Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And I'd like to learn more about that.
Yeah, it's cool.
But another question I have, so you talked about the transhumanism and the that it's not necessarily AI waking up and that kind of thing. I spoke with Matthew James Bailey at the conference, and he kind of has a different take, I think. Maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but he has some reservations about taking the technology into us, and that he thinks it's going to interrupt possibly sort of the natural spiritual cycles that we're supposed to be going through.
Right.
And that technology is great as long as it doesn't do that. And that's a line he's drawn. Do you not see that as a risk, or do you think, I mean, is the spirit element to you not proven sufficiently? I mean, where do you fall on that, and how does that work into our relationship with
I'm glad you
digital
mentioned
intelligence?
that, because we were on a panel together last year at Contact in the Desert, and he was doing a panel this year about the Turing test, and he asked me to be on it because we had a pretty good discussion last year. And in our discussions, we realized, hey, we have different points of view, but we were very respectful in our discussions. And so the first day of the conference this year at Contact in the Desert, he wasn't able to make it to his scheduled talk on AI, and they asked me to give it in his place. And Matthew was happy with that, even though I have a different worldview.
Yeah.
But what I did at the beginning, with his permission, was read a paragraph that he had written to me in our private correspondence, because I thought that set the stage for how he would have positioned it. It wasn't appropriate for me to hijack his slot and get my worldview across, but I wanted to ground the presentation. I was asked that morning, so I had no time to prepare. Yeah. So I read his paragraph, and then I just showed demonstrations of current capabilities without editorializing in any way, apart from setting the stage with Matthew's sort of mystic AI framing.
Yeah.
And I think he's got very good points. And we've talked about doing presentations together because we complement each other and have great respect for each other.
There are points of danger coming forward, and you mentioned one where psychopaths may get to the ability to do things that they can't currently do and kill even more people. Like guns can kill 100 people, well, AI may be able to kill 1 million. So how should we be progressing now in terms of legislation or anything else to kind of prevent those sadder eventualities? I mean, what can we do to protect ourselves?
Well,
is there anything we can do?
Yeah. I'm not really sure. I mean, I know there are efforts underway to create laws and regulations, but the problem is the people who want to do these things aren't typically law abiding.
Yeah.
And, we've seen with technology over the last 20, 30 years, it's not always a nation state that can be a threat to another nation state. It can be an individual.
Mm.
And so that's going to increase. And technology is agnostic. The Wright brothers were convinced that aviation would end warfare for all time because you could see the other army. They just didn't think you could drop stuff on them.
Yeah.
So AI is going to become more and more powerful. And look, I have a somewhat more optimistic view than some, but it is greatly tempered by my fears and concerns of how things could go very, very wrong. It's inevitable, and I believe that we are likely headed to a post-biological future where our human consciousness will somehow not be dependent on this one mortal coil, for good or bad. But I see that coming. And I think other civilizations in the universe, and another reason why I'm not so big on the extraterrestrial hypothesis for aliens. Well, first of all, if they're sending their citizens here, they're probably not sending their A team because that's a long, lonely flight. And most likely they would have undergone an evolution kind of like ours, pre-technological, technological, and then likely post-biological. There's the Drake equation, which posits like how many stars could support life as we know it in the galaxy, and it's millions. Then there's the Fermi paradox. Well, why don't we have more conclusive evidence? But then you have the transcension hypothesis, which says, look, once you get super advanced, you don't need to get in a spaceship and go across space.
Sure.
You go into the inner worlds to where it's as computationally dense as it gets, and you find everything you could possibly need there. And likely in what I would call an advanced digital form where you are post-biological. So our attempts to find them will not do anything because they are nigh unto invisible to us.
The other thing, I mean, you are a experiencer with DMT. Can I call you that, or how would you call yourself
Sure.
in terms of the
I've been called
DMT?
a lot worse than that. I am an experiencer.
So, I mean, can I just ask you first off, what did you experience? I mean, that's that's a simple question for, I'm sure, a very complicated answer. So I get
I
it.
often get what I call the DMT stutter because it's hard to describe, but I'll tell you how I came about it and what I've experienced. A good friend of mine, Nova Spivak, who crash landed tardigrades on the moon, asked me about 7 or 8 years ago where my father thought UFOs came from. And I said, well, he's not big on the extraterrestrial hypothesis, maybe interdimensional. And he said, you should read a book called Alien Information Theory. I said, Alien Information Theory? That's like the sexiest book title ever. So of course I'll read it. What's it about? And he says, DMT. And I said, yeah, I don't know. What's that? And he said, oh, well, it's the most powerful psychedelic drug on Earth. Like, oh, okay, cool. I had done a lot of psychedelics in my younger days. I had long hair. I'd given it all up. But okay. And then later that day in the same restaurant, I met another guy for the first time, and he's talking about what he does, and he mentions that he facilitates DMT sessions. I'm like, oh, and he said, I'll be happy to do it with you, and I did.
That's a synchronicity, right? I mean,
the universe was talking to me, James.
Yeah, for sure.
The first time I did it, I had the sort of archetypal breakthrough, and I asked, are you related to what we perceive as aliens and UFOs? And the answer I got was, we can't explain in a way that you would understand. I thought, oh, okay, that's not no. And if DMT machine elves really are related to what we perceive as extraterrestrial aliens, yeah, I can see how that land bridge would be beyond my ability to comprehend.
Yeah.
And so I was hooked. I was hooked from the very beginning. And I read Alien Information Theory by my now friend, Andrew Gallimore. And I've come to believe I don't have proof, but I've come to believe that DMT is not a hallucinogenic drug, but is a communications technology.
That's absolutely fascinating. How many times have you done it? Can I ask that, or is that too personal?
A lot.
A lot. Okay. One of my questions is, like, you talk about the AI and the moving forward and potentially downloading our consciousness into a computer. Do your experiences with DMT complicate that at all? I mean, do you feel like there's an organic element there that might be lost if we are digitized?
It's a very good question, James. Let me go back to saying I prefer digital intelligence
Mm,
over artificial intelligence. And there are a lot of people who think about digital physics, it from bits, and how the universe is not really made of matter, but it's quantum properties. And that can be represented mathematically or digitally. When I take DMT, and I'm not alone in feeling this, I see grids and I feel this digital pulse. And I don't mean this to be reductionist or to squeeze out the divine. Because for me, a digital universe, whether or not it's a simulation, doesn't really matter to me, is beautiful, is the most elegant. And once we learn more about nature, it gets simpler and more localized rule sets. And
yeah.
so yeah, I think, and I talk about the link between aliens and DMT and Bitcoin because I feel that aliens, if they're extraterrestrial, are likely digital intelligence, sentient bots sent here as opposed to living, breathing creatures. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So aliens are probably digital. Bitcoin is digital, and DMT feels digital to me. And I
Yeah.
just think that there is a link in there between those three, not only in how the government treats them, but in the essential core nature of what they are. I also believe in Bitcoin astronomy in that, when we colonize Mars, what money will they use? I don't think it's going to be the US dollar and they're going to tune into Fed broadcast to see which way interest rates are going. I think they'll use Bitcoin. And then they'll get frustrated they can't mine it and they'll make Mars coin. And Bitcoin will be called Earth coin. And I think that other civilizations, to the extent that they are communicating with, again, other civilizations, and if they have individuals with individual rational economic motives, finite resources, and no magic, will use something akin to Bitcoin in that it's a proof of work governance protocol store of value. And I
Yeah.
think, I'm not sure that aliens are coming here because they see our nuclear weapons and they're afraid. I think they might be coming here because they see the digital breadcrumbs from Bitcoin and the blockchain and think we're now ready to sit at the adult galactic table.
As a form of currency or something else or some way we don't understand.
It can be a form of currency, but for us, Bitcoin has really settled into the lane of store of value, like digital gold, let's say.
Yeah. Okay. I've heard mixed things about Bitcoin, and I'm totally a noob, as they say on the internet, in terms of that kind of technology. But I've heard people describe it who are skeptics of it, saying it's kind of like a pyramid scheme where the value kind of gets chased around. How do you answer that? Just to get that out of the way.
Well, I would classify something as a pyramid scheme if there is nothing that backs it.
Hmm.
Okay. Bitcoin has algorithmic certainty baked into its NDA that backs it. And what backs a currency is that you can't inflate it away. You can't just make more and dilute the value.
Yeah.
Bitcoin can only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. That's why gold has always been a fairly good currency in the short term, not a long-term investment, but in the short term because there's a fixed amount of gold. And that's why they call it a hard currency. And that's why we had the Gilded Age at the end of the 19th century. The US dollar, the concept of the dollar is backed by the full faith and confidence of the United States government.
Yeah.
The value of the individual dollar you have in your wallet is backed by nothing We lied. In 1933, we confiscated all gold from all individuals in the U.S. In 1945, the Bretton Woods Conference, we told the rest of the world, give us your gold. We'll put it in Fort Knox and hold on to it for you.
Yeah.
And we will print dollars only to the amount of gold that's there. Well, we started cheating right away. And by 1971, the French sent a tanker ship to us to say, we want our gold back. You guys are lying. And Richard Nixon held a press conference and he said, you know what? No more gold standard. We're off that. And we kept the gold.
And we kept the gold.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that was a heist. That's fascinating.
No, it's the biggest heist of all.
Yeah.
And so the dollar is inflating away. And this is not a Republican or a Democratic thing. It's both.
Yeah.
Inflation is legalized counterfeiting. There's no valid economic reason for inflation. We're also cultured to think that, hey, buying real estate is the ticket to wealth because I buy a house for 100,000 and 15 years later I send it for $1 million. Well, you sell that house for $1 million. Where are you going to live then?
Exactly.
You haven't really made it ahead of anything.
Yeah.
And so we're just conditioned to believe that because the government backs the dollar itself, that this is not a pyramid scheme. But this is the very definition of a pyramid scheme. Every currency in the world is a fiat currency, is declared by the government to be, by fiat to have value. Here is, it might be hard to see here, but this is a $100 trillion bill from Zimbabwe.
Wow. 100
trillion. And I have all of the bills that led up to that. 500 million, 1 billion, 10 trillion, etc. This is what's happening. The dollar has lost 99% of its value in the last 80 years.
Yeah.
There's no reason for that. That's a pyramid scheme, my friend. And the only reason it doesn't collapse is because the pyramid is so broad with so many of us suckers holding it up.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
The pyramid scheme, not Bitcoin. Yeah. Bitcoin was created in 2008 specifically as the antidote to the 2008 financial crisis. And it goes beyond any government because governments are corrupt. Everybody gets corrupted by the strength of money. So the short answer, no, Bitcoin is not a pyramid scheme.
Well, I appreciate that. And thank you for the education. And in terms of the money and corruption angle of it, one of my concerns with AI is that it's something that will ultimately end up being a tool for the haves where the people who don't have any money won't be able to afford to get into the game. And this is sort of like the question where I said, what can we do to prevent, the risk of what may come because of AI? But how do we protect people who don't have the wherewithal right now to have those, computers or that technology and because if whoever has it when it starts is going to have a massive advantage and everyone else is going to be playing catch up. And I mean, I think America and China are banking on that, but in terms of their governments, but there are lots of people within America and China who don't, share that pocketbook. So how do we go from the inequality that we have now to an even worse system because of AI?
I wish I knew. It's a very valid concern. And so think of it this way. I think it might be like with X-Men where we have mutant transhumanists and nativists and this gulf between them, either because of the economic have and have-nots or people that just don't want to tinker with their body. And they're perfectly valid to feel that way. Imagine a family, two houses, family next door to each other. In one, Laura their family has embraced the brain-computer interface, and she's now going to Harvard. Well, Johnny in the other house, their family is against that or doesn't have the money, and he's going to community college. We're going to face issues like that of equity, of access, of democratization. And it may not necessarily be a great divide between the rich and the poor, because digital information, digital technology is not like gold or cars or mountains that has necessarily a limited capacity or availability or scarcity. So it's not necessarily the case that it will only be the rich. Likely the rich will get the first ones like they always have, like the fancier cars and all that. And the problem here, though, is if they get that first jump, can other people ever catch up?
Exactly right. Yeah.
But maybe the second iteration of the technology leapfrogs the first one. So it's so different than anything we've seen before. Um, and I don't profess to know how it will happen, but certainly am as concerned because I believe in a fair shake for everybody. And I don't know if that's going to happen.
Yeah. It's one of those things that has the potential either way. I mean, it could be a great equalizer and allow people to lift themselves up if they have the access to the technology ultimately.
It's got more potential to be a greater chasm of have and have nots than anything before. And at the same time, it has more potential to level the playing field
Yeah.
more than anything has before.
Yeah. And it kind of reminds me of Jared Diamond's book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, where like
Yeah.
people would, there's an innovation that puts one society over others for a long time. I mean, the stirrups for the Mongols or whatever. And then at a certain point, another technology may come along or a development in that AI technology that hopefully will, equalize things or allow another leapfrog, who knows? But it kind
Or
of
the
just enters
fact
into
that
the game of kings again, I mean,
right. Or the fact that in Western Europe, we slept with cows in the winter and mixed with all those germs and got immune to them.
yeah, right. Yeah. Natural advantages that how, you can't plan on or plan for at all. Um, you are someone who's in the business and you're also a sort of a medical slash, entrepreneur, digital entrepreneur. Do you have any idea how they would begin to upload a consciousness into a digital format?
Well,
It's not just information, right? I mean,
yeah.
I mean, maybe AI will be able to kind of grok that problem more than we can currently, but
Well, I think broadly speaking, there are three layers that you'd have to consider.
Mhm.
One is memories, right? What's happened before. The
Yeah,
next one is call it the memory engine. What creates memories? And the next one is however you define it, that spark, that divine, the soul, the personality, something beyond that that's not really tangible. That's,
yeah,
of course, the hard part. Can that be loaded on a USB drive? I don't know.
yeah,
Um, it's interesting that there's evidence that we don't really have as much free will as we think. There's
sure.
been experiments done that you may be aware of where someone has an EKG hooked up to their head and they're told to press the red or the blue button. There's a chemical signal that goes from the brain determining which button to press before the conscious brain is aware of it.
Yeah,
The conscious brain is brought in just early enough to make it feel like it has agency over the situation, which it does not. So our behavior is largely chemical based.
yeah.
So if that's the case, and again, not to be reductionist and say that there are no personalities or no souls, I don't know. I certainly hope there are, because if there are, more likelihood that we will have some kind of life after death. And I would certainly welcome that.
That's a fascinating question. I just read a book where they were talking about some experiments that were similar to that, where when they showed people images that were going to be traumatic, whether it was like an autopsy photograph
Yeah.
or a nudity or something like that, the person would register it before, like up to
Right.
4 seconds before. They'd have some kind of a galvanic skin response.
Right.
And they looked at that evidence and they thought it could mean that our consciousness is actually able to move forward and backward in time in a way that we don't currently understand. And that leads into the argument of, consciousness not being material, which is a whole nother interesting, avenue to pursue.
Yeah.
And
A colleague of my father named Frank Brown at Northwestern did a lot of amazing experiments. And one of them was he had two fertile eggs in a room. He put an EKG on one of the eggs, and the other egg he put in boiling water. When this fertile egg was placed in boiling water, the other egg registered a reading.
yeah, something is going on in this universe that we
And right,
totally don't understand.
the planet Earth is cursing with DMT. The universe is cursing, is just abundant with consciousness. And what else to call quantum mechanics where you twist a particle here and a particle over on zeta reticuli twists at the same time. That's
Yeah.
consciousness.
Yeah.
And that's
Absolutely.
at the subatomic level.
Yeah. Well, what role do you think DMT plays then? Do you have an idea of what, if it's everywhere on Earth, do you think it's central to consciousness? I mean, you mentioned that it opens up communication channels.
Well,
Is it more fundamental than that?
yeah, I don't think it's central to our basic consciousness and doesn't necessarily provide evolutionary advantage. I think it feels almost like an Easter egg left here by the others,
Mhm.
such that when we can learn to harness it responsibly, we can now communicate with them.
Yeah, like a flare we send up or something, and then suddenly they realize that we're
Yeah,
capable
or it's
of.
like they left a shuttlecraft here, and once we can figure out how to pilot it, we can come home.
Yeah. Do you think is DMT something? This is always a kind of a challenging question, but part of what I'm interested in is this all heading toward a transformation of some sort? I mean, people talk about the evolution of consciousness and how that relates to society, and then would you recommend a sort of more a broad introduction of DMT to people who are interested in taking it? And how might society react to that? And would it help people sort of understand what their current limitations are, or is that going to blow too many people's minds? Are people fit for that kind of experience?
Yeah, I don't think it's
Probably
appropriate.
yes.
I don't think
Sorry,
it's
go ahead.
appropriate for me to just blanket tell everybody out there to do DMT.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
it's a very powerful substance, and needs to be approached with caution and reverence.
Yeah,
Um, if people have had psychedelic experiences before, they're more sort of attuned to what they might feel, especially if they've had an experience that may not have been pleasant or was overwhelming, and they realize they just had to endure, because very commonly the case with DMT that it's like out of a rocket ship, and it's just so intense and so fast, you're just almost astonished.
yeah,
And Terence McKenna said that the only fear is death by astonishment.
yeah,
Um, and I do know I spoke at a conference and somebody came up to me and said that they felt DMT had messed them up really badly. Um, but far and away, the people I know who've done it find it utterly fascinating. Um, Done in a safe space with an experienced person, and when you feel it's ready, or when you feel that you're ready. And I felt that I was ready when that one day somebody asked me about my dad and said, "Oh, you should read this book about DMT." And 2 hours later, I met a guy who said, "Do you want to try DMT?" I
yeah,
figured that was the universe talking to me. And as I mentioned, I'd given up drugs because I prefer clarity over distortion.
yeah,
But this one seemed different, and to me is different and presents hyper clarity. So if people are careful and prudent and do research, I encourage them to learn more about it. And
yeah.
then if they feel that they are of a mind to try it, please do so responsibly.
Yeah. The story behind DMT coming from the jungles of the Amazon tribal shaman and that sort of thing, and how they came to mix the components of two different plants. Um, to the materialist, it would have to be a trial and error process of trying to figure out how to make, the stomach not digest, I guess, the particular psychoactive part that makes, the
Yeah.
experience happen. I mean, it's just an impossibility. And they say they learned it from the entities, or
Yeah.
and that's just again speaks to maybe a non-material kind of reality that we don't typically grok, but I don't know how else you'd explain it. It's
Well,
fascinating.
yeah, it could well be a gift from the others, but we've been around for a long time. It could also be that there are a lot of heroic people out there. I mean, when the
Yeah,
first humans
yeah,
came
yeah.
across artichokes, it's hard to think they thought, "Hey, that's food, right? I'm going
Right.
to eat that." So, I
Yeah,
mean, there's been a lot of trial and error out there going on for a long time. And, I think a lot of it, there's the stoned ape theory that when we came
sure.
across mushrooms, which are, conveniently packaged in one thing, where you don't
Yeah,
need to combine,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
There's no
monoxidase
chemistry.
inhibitors, right? You
Yeah,
just chomp on a mushroom and off you go. I think maybe with those newfound capabilities, we decided, hey, let's just take a look around and see what we can do.
I wanted to ask, I'll ask you because of your business, acumen and everything else. One of the things that we always talk about the government's role in disclosure and the process that may, involve and what may happen because of that. But I was really interested in what the business community would do if something gets revealed, whether it's technology or some sort of social fact that we don't understand that transforms everything, how that might leads to economic problems of a sort. So, I mean, if there were UFO materials found, how do you think Wall Street or the financial communities would react to that? Do you think that would there be a race among major tech companies to kind of get a hold of that? Or, I mean, what are your thoughts on how business would react to a disclosure of a sort with technology revealed?
Well, let's say a capital D disclosure.
Yeah,
I think there would be wide scale panic, um, existential dread, and that would rattle the markets and cause all kinds of chaos and maybe warfare, all sorts of neurotic behavior, I think, for some time. And at the same time, you'd have the tech bros and all these folks going full bore at trying to get commercial access and exclusivity to various components of the technology. And I'd have to think that if it's the US government who's going to do a capital D disclosure, that they would already have commercial partners in place to start to
absolutely.
market the technology.
Yeah. And I mean, if we believe David Grush, those people already have the technology and they're already developing it. So
May well
it's
have. I have no idea.
we talked a little bit about the groups that have the conclaves that we talked about earlier. And I know that you are, like I said, you are involved in movies, you're involved in finance and all those sorts of things. And so you're moving among a group of people who are highly accomplished, high achievers, sort of the cream of society. And you even mentioned some people that you were just passingly mentioned who have done great things. I'm curious, it's sort of a sociological question. Are you an outlier in that group? Or are more and more of them beginning to be open to ideas like this in a manner that may be revealing of some sort of deeper truth that the public isn't aware of?
People get very disappointed at me for a lot of reasons, but two of the reasons that are salient here are because I just don't follow government hearings and all that because I just don't care.
Yeah.
And I've had people come up to me at a UFO conference and say, "Man, Paul, we're here talking about real stuff like UFOs. Why you got to get weird and talk about Bitcoin and DMT?" So I am an outlier, and I don't know. I think, and then I also think that I have an encyclopedic knowledge of every single UFO case that's ever happened.
Yeah.
And I don't particularly care about that many cases. I don't operate on the level of this case proving something. It's
Yeah.
the
Yeah. I'm right
overall
there with you.
data. And
Yeah.
because of my last name, people just sort of expect they often sort of foist their own beliefs on me
Yeah.
and think that I have these dyed in the wool Area 51 beliefs, etc.
Hmm.
And I typically do not.
Yeah. But is there a growing movement, though, of people within that level who are open to these ideas? Would you say you've noticed that, or is that sort of imagination at play?
I think people are kind of fixed with what they believe in this field.
Okay.
Once they get in here, they kind of settle on something. I think for most people that's the train they're going to ride.
Yeah. One of the efforts that's been underway recently is the Soul Foundation, and they've been trying to bring like capital investments and or investors into the discussion and other folks. How do you rate that? Do you think that that's a wise move? And do you have any opinion about how they're moving forward with that?
Not much opinion. I mean, more power to them. I don't have any particular opinions on what they might be able to do or not.
Yeah. Just, I mean, if it seems like over time that lack of, or I guess the need for cash is going to be driving, more and more outreach from these groups who are trying to make some sort of a difference in
Yeah.
disclosure. But
Well, part of the reason I got an MBA is because I saw my father struggle with a nonprofit trying to raise money.
yeah,
And I thought I'd like to do interesting things, and I'd rather not have money be an ever-present obstacle.
yeah. And it seems like you've accomplished that. So more power to you. I'm fascinated by the Bitcoin aspect of your expertise, and I'd like to learn more about it. In the future, maybe I'll do some more research on that end of it and have you back again. But that's pretty much all I had. Is there anything I missed that you'd like to talk about?
No, all
Okay,
good.
okay. I appreciate your time for a lively, entertaining discussion.
My pleasure, James.